Thank you for joining us this afternoon for a Becker's Business Review webinar discussion. We've got five great panelists, myself, Scott Becker, moderating the panelist discussion. The questions we're going to talk about are really came out of recent headlines. Amazon versus Walmart. Where's the future lie with Amazon? Will Amazon take over everything? Will it implode at somewhere under its own sort of like cost and growth and size? And sort of more nuanced, but very important to listeners from the perspective of a business operator, owner. What does Amazon's growth mean to companies like Venkat and Nader's company and other healthcare companies? The second question we'll touch on is sort of tariffs and interest rates. Any thoughts on this? What do they mean for the U.S. economy? Is the discussion correct out there, or is it overplayed in terms of their impact or import? What are the negatives to it? What are the positives to it? Just some quick thoughts on it from our panelists. And finally, third, gun control, and not intending to be political, pro or negative, but is there any pathway to some middle ground on gun control? That it seems like there's at least some vast part of the middle of the electorate that would like to see some level of gun control. And I know it's a very, very tough issue because people feel very strongly on it from both perspectives. So that was sort of the three questions we're going to tee up today, or three discussion points. We promised everybody in and out within 30 minutes. Venkat, let me start with you and ask you to briefly introduce yourself. I'm going to ask all five of you to introduce yourself. Venkat, then Nader, Emily, Ayla, Morgan. Venkat?
Hey everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Venkat Mocherla. I serve as the head of business development for an AI company in healthcare known as Qventus, where we work with some of the top health systems around the country to improve their operations.
Thank you, Venkat. And Venkat's company's grown remarkably well over the last several years. Predictive analytics, just great growth. Stanford, Mercy, great health systems. Nader, you've grown your company tremendously. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me. This should be fun today. Nader, Samii, CEO of National Medical Billing Services. We are focused very heavily in the surgery center marketplace, where we provide revenue cycle services as well as kind of consultative and analytic services as it relates to the revenue cycle for our clients, and we're in about 40 states around the nation.
And how many employees today, both between contracted and employed, how many employees you guys have today?
A little north of 500, Scott.
And how many was it when you first bought into the business? I know you'd been in the revenue cycle business before, bought into this business with Lisa Rock, your partner in this business, who's magnificent. How many did you guys have when you first got into this business?
About 35. That was mid 2010.
Okay, so magnificent growth. Emily, by background, serves as managing editor of Becker's Healthcare, runs the health IT line, some other lines, also is our most read political commentator. Emily, a short introduction on yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for introducing me, Scott. My name is Emily Rappleye. I'm a managing editor of Becker's Healthcare. And I've also overseen our health IT line for the past 2 years.
And Ayla runs our financial line, CFO, revenue cycle, is our most read writer throughout the entire organization. Ayla, a few moments on yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. My name is Ayla Ellison, and I'm the managing editor of Becker's Hospital Review. Like Scott mentioned, I head up our CFO rev cycle lines, write about those issues every day, and also I'm involved with Becker's Business Review as well.
Thank you. And Morgan, I know you run the payer line, do a magnificent job of it, and also help with Ayla run the Becker's Business Review line. A moment to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. My name is Morgan Haefner, and I'm an assistant editor with Becker's Hospital Review. Like Scott said, I run the payer lines here and also have a focus on our business review.
Thank you. Venkat and Nader, let me start with you on the Amazon question. Is Amazon impossible to compete with today, like Walmart speaks about constantly their competition with Amazon, how they're trying to make progress on the internet and online, but sort of still having a hard time catching up. Where does Walmart fit in that? And then more so, what does the future look like for businesses that, any kind of business? How concerned are you about Amazon's growth? How do you see that? Is that something where Amazon at some point we all love shopping on Amazon, we all hate having to compete with them or worry about what they do with our corner or our local retailers? Venkat, any thoughts?
Yeah, boy, where do we start? I think from where we sit in Silicon Valley, although Amazon's based in Seattle, it's probably right now the most important technology company, and I could argue most important company today in the economic forums. I think when you think about Amazon's growth and trajectory, in 1997, the company in their S1 stated that their objective is to be the leading online retailer of information-based products and with a focus in books. And today, their explicit statement is their vision is to be the Earth's most customer-centric company, to build a place where people can come and to find and discover anything they might buy online. And just to give you all a sense of what that means, I mean, we all have come to know Amazon as something we go online and buy, from iPhone cases to books to technology products. But we're an AI company that actually uses Amazon's infrastructure. So Amazon, a few years ago, started a company called Amazon Web Services, where they provide cloud computing services to early stage companies like ours. That business 3 years ago was $8 billion in revenue, doubling every year. Last year they did $17.5 billion, growing at 45%. And that's a business that most people don't even know about. Not to mention their Whole Foods acquisition. They just bought a company called Ring. I think the way they are thinking about it is, what percentage of the economy can they be? And by far, it's the most ambitious company. I think Walmart, just to be real quick there, just to comment there, have played catch up. They acquired a company called Jet.com mainly for their talent, but they're really behind only because of Amazon's ambition is much larger than even just being a retailer of sorts.
And so you're in the predictive analytics business for healthcare, and you use Amazon's back office services, as does almost everybody today. Not everybody, but a ton of people use their cloud services and other services, the AWS part of that. Is there some point at which you get concerned about having to compete with Amazon? Well, who do you look at? You've got your regular competitors in your business. Who do you look at out of Google, Amazon, any of those that could end up in competition with you, or do you not? That's not an immediate fear?
Yeah, I don't think it's an immediate fear, only because, when you think about, we just came back from HIMSS, Amazon Web Services actually profiled our company. I think what these companies want to be is the infrastructure layer. Certainly Google has had ambitions with Google Cloud and Google Healthcare team to be much more in the last mile. But I think where we stand helping health system operations, today we see Amazon much more of a partner. Now, who's to say within 5 years what this would look like? Because certainly Amazon, Google, they just want to compete in every business everywhere. And increasingly, every business looks like a technology business, and every business is driven by software. But today, if I was sitting much more in the pharmacy or the supply chain ecosystem, I'd be thinking much more about Amazon from a competitive perspective. But in healthcare, I think the last mile and the first mile, how do you get data and how do you influence change, is so nuanced. It takes time. But certainly their ambitions are mapped in healthcare. Today, I don't think of them as a competitor.
Nader, some of your thoughts on Amazon and Walmart, and sort of the bigger question as to how much does a company like yours, you've had this record growth in the revenue cycle business, fear, I don't know if fear is the right word because you've been so nimble and so gifted in driving your company, but where do you see this over the next couple of years?
Great question, Scott. And by the way, fear is not a bad word in general. Fear motivates, I think, and anyone who's paying attention to these guys, I'm with Venkat in that I don't see them immediately as a threat, but I think, gosh, they pop up. I don't think I've ever seen a company move as quickly to start these kind of tech-enabled businesses and build serious scale out of nowhere really quickly. So impressive in what they've done, and of course, at the same time, scary. But going back a step to the Amazon versus Walmart, I think it's actually a really interesting discussion from that perspective, in that these two companies have really overnight changed the retail landscape. And to piggyback on Venkat's comment, no question Walmart is chasing Amazon, but I think that they are getting much more aggressive than they've ever been, and more ambitious than they've ever been with respect to that. And I think that they are very determined to battle Amazon for that position. And it's a tough one to chase. But a few numbers that I think are interesting when you look at those two companies is that Walmart hit over 500 billion in revenue this year, which is about 3.5 times that of what Amazon has, and its net income was around 14 billion relative to about 3 billion for Amazon. So, 4+ times. And while their market cap doesn't line up because their growth rates haven't been the same as Amazon, it does certainly give them, as a company that's deciding to go after and pursue trying to become essentially some variation or version of Amazon or win that game, they have a lot of capital to do it. And they also, with their size, are in a position to kind of put a little more pressure on suppliers to get even a better price. So between the free cash flow they have to invest aggressively online, which is less capital intensive than what Amazon is doing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me ask you something that, it's so interesting. Over the last 2 decades, Walmart was sort of lambasted by Main Street as killing Main Street local retailers. It's sort of like, the place that local businesses grew to dislike, because Walmart was sort of their enemy. It would come into towns and it would just take up so much business that it would hurt lots of local businesses. Is it fascinating to see now so many of us sort of cheering for Walmart to stay in this fight, and sort of cheering for Walmart to fight this fight, because now instead of being viewed as the big guy, the Goliath killing the little guy, they're now viewed as the last party standing to sort of fight Amazon on its own turf. Is that sort of a fascinating change in paradigm, or what do you want that?
I agree, Scott. I agree completely, and it really is interesting to think through that. And one of the things is that Walmart has stores within 5 miles of 70% of the households in the country, and so they employ significantly more people around the world. And when they do come to town, they are employing folks. So there's no question pressure on the smaller businesses. But there's a local economy benefit as well. One thing I also found interesting in their competition here, which is, I'm not sure how widely known or understood it is, but when you look at online purchases across the board, obviously there's different products that may go in different directions, but kind of across the board, Amazon, Walmart's about 25% less expensive than buying from Amazon. So as you look at this over time, I think Walmart I would not count them out in this game. And like I said, I've never seen them so aggressive in trying to come after there. I read a quote that said, Amazon's trying to become Walmart before Walmart can become Amazon. And it's a little bit easier in a sense for Walmart to do some of the things from a capital perspective to go online and build a stronger presence there than it is for Amazon to get that local on the ground presence.
I'm going to ask you one other question, but let me ask this of Emily. Emily, Amazon's got these crazy ambitions to be sort of, Jeff Bezos connected to Amazon, has a rocket company. They want to be in the logistics business, which has been a heavily profitable business. They're now in the retail grocery business. They're in the Amazon Web Services business. You see them throughout healthcare. Is there some point at which they reach the point of conglomerates, like other conglomerates, that they're in so many different areas that places like Walmart can compete with them well, or others can compete with them well by being more specialized, one bit more specialized than a company that's every place, or is Amazon just so formidable that that's almost hard to see? Emily, any thoughts on that, or what you see out there in the health IT or just the business world?
Yeah, Scott, I think that's a really great question. And my view here is really that Amazon is a tech company, and that's kind of how it's currently beating out Walmart. And I think because of its model of partnering, kind of like Venkat mentioned earlier, in health IT, we're seeing them work with Cerner, Deloitte, VMware, and because they don't have to be an expert in anything, they're already partnering with the experts. So we see them partnering with Washington Post, or just companies in every different sector that are the expert, and they're just kind of the underlying technology underneath. I think that really helps them because they're a partner, that they won't collapse under their own weight.
Does it scare you that they own, or Jeff Bezos' separate company owns the Washington Post, or does that give you comfort? How do you view that?
I think that's a great question.
Go ahead,
yeah,
sorry.
I think it'll be really interesting to see, just because he has such a different philosophy than the New York Times, where they're kind of doubling down on subscribers and high quality in-depth reporting. And I think Washington Post, he's taking that more the Amazon route, trying to get as many readers as possible without building technically like a subscriber base. And right now, I think it's just too early to tell, but I do think it's exciting to see some tech companies investing in journalism. So
fascinating. And you see this sort of contrast being Elon Musk, who's the other person of this generation that probably has these crazy outsized sort of ambitions. You look at Elon Musk, who's done this amazing stuff with SpaceX and Tesla, but he seems to be closer to periodically getting caught under the weight of all that he's doing, where Jeff Bezos built such a cash machine and such a huge business and just invests everything back into it, that he seems to be less getting caught up in this. Any thoughts on that comparison or what you see?
To be honest, I don't know too much about Elon Musk, but I do think that the strategy that Bezos is using with Amazon will help it, remain sustainable for a long time.
Great. Thank you. Any thoughts on this question of, and how does sort of like the business environment that you cover and see? I know that the most read stories often, whether they're across the healthcare line, the business line, often touch on Amazon, Apple, and so forth. Any thoughts on sort of people and their thoughts about competing with Amazon, the fear out there, or any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things that I've been seeing sort of covering this area lately is that due to the competition, specifically between Walmart and Amazon, we're seeing the sort of the lines blur between traditional and online retail. And I believe it was Venkat earlier mentioned Amazon or Walmart's purchase of Jet to kind of enter Amazon space. And then you see Amazon purchasing Whole Foods, and those lines just continue to blur. And I'm not sure, I agree with the others that it seems like Walmart is continually playing catch up. But I think that, it's more difficult for Amazon to expand in the brick and mortar space than for Walmart to expand online. Although today we did just see, or I believe it was today or possibly yesterday, that Walmart announced that they're going to expand their home grocery delivery coast to coast. So that's just one more example of this competition and sort of the new businesses and how it's changing their business model.
Fascinating. I mean, as I hear you talk about this, and I'm going to move to Morgan on a different set of questions, it's almost become, today's entertainment, the combat out there, the business combat out there between the Amazons and the Walmarts has almost become like the gladiator sport of our generation, watching what happens with this. We all sort of kind of love to shop on Amazon, but kind of hate their competitive position. But it's fascinating to watch how interesting it is to see these mammoth growth businesses. It almost reminds you of 150 years ago, when Nader and I were alive, but you guys weren't, when they were, when you have these huge, crazy entrepreneurs of a different age, the J.P. Morgans, the Andrew Carnegies, and stuff like that, how that's come back to this in this generation. And some of these stories, even Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, before these folks were the biggest names, and then Bezos has sort of usurped them all. And it's fascinating to see this growth and ambition. We got about 10 minutes left. Morgan, let me turn you to a different issue. And interest rates rising, tariffs, gun control. Are there any solutions on these? Are tariffs going to be a disaster for the country, or are they going to be so limited it's not be a disaster? And with gun control, any way to get to an answer on gun control? And I'll come back to each of the panelists really to touch on these issues of tariffs and gun control.
Yeah, thanks so much, Scott. I'll just jump into the interest rates. I think that's a really interesting topic. There's obviously two sides to it. Low interest rates are going to lead to lots of capital. I mean, people with capital are still going to invest, but there's just going to be more money in the market. So you're going to see employment probably fall. But on the flip side of that, of course, you get inflation. And so people aren't as willing to save and invest. So low interest rates have some good things going for them. And then, of course, like inflation is never good. And then high interest rates on the flip side, can lead to better investments in promising businesses and can allow businesses to invest in talent and new technology. And so I personally haven't done a lot of reporting on low interest rates and high interest rates, but I think there's definitely large arguments for both. And, we're heading toward more high interest rates. And so, I'm wondering what the other panelists have to say about this.
Thank you. And Venkat, let me move it to you real quickly. Interest rates, tariffs, and gun control. A couple thoughts on both subjects.
Yeah, I think if you take a step back, as I think Ray Dalio said, we're sort of in this Goldilocks moment, right? So if you take a step back at the economy, we're quite deleveraged. Inflation actually is not a challenge right now. Growth numbers look pretty good, and we just got a massive stimulus in the U.S. And then both banks and companies have a ton of cash, and so we really are sitting in a very good spot right now, and that's why I think monetary policy is quite tricky at the current moment. And so I think it's always important in these moments to just take a step back and understand the context of where our economy lies. I think in terms of tariffs themselves, I think the risk I see is, I know aluminum and steel are the two industries initially from the president's actions that are going to be impacted, but I think the place I feel is most risky is in the execution of all this that can lead to trade wars. I mean, companies like Boeing are going to be in the middle of all of this. And so I think it can lead to a potential trade war and companies like Boeing suffering as part of that. But it'd be very interesting to watch that. And for me, lastly on gun control, I think we've in some ways, I think, skewed in such extremes in this country that common sense in the middle has lost out a little bit. And I think conversations like this at least give me hope that we could start to bring it back into the middle and not be always in the fringes on YouTube comments.
And let me ask you a question, Venkat. It's a very practical question. I might have to buy another car for one of our kids. Is the tariffs going to lead to higher costs for buying cars immediately?
Not immediately, no. I think if you look at a lot of these companies, it depends what car you're buying, obviously, but even a lot of these companies that are Korean or Japanese have plants here. They actually price in a lot of supplies, and the supply chain itself is actually very complex and thought through and nuanced. So when it comes to a lot of these immediate changes, I don't think the customers will see. Obviously, there's going to be impact farther out, but people will be surprised how nuanced and complicated the supply chains are to think about potential swings in the marketplace.
Right. So you have a big aggressive position by the president. You have a big aggressive reaction on the other side, and the reality of how it all plays out is very uncertain, is what it sounds like.
Exactly. Yep.
Emily, any thoughts on these issues? Tariffs, interest rates, gun control, and any ability to reach middle ground on these issues?
Definitely. Thanks, Scott. I think with tariffs, we're seeing the headlines that this might trigger a trade war with the EU or Canada, that kind of thing. And it's hard to say, but I think so far the consensus is it probably won't. Boston Federal Reserve President said that he doesn't think it's going to trigger a trade war. Right now, we're low on unemployment, inflation's on track, GDP is strong, so it's a good environment for investing. And then just in general, I think that metal isn't a significant share of the U.S. economy, so it is possible on the flip side that we'll really see more of a political retaliation from that. And then as far as
Emily, is the tariff issue a symbolic issue for the president, or he's just trying to show that he's behind some constituents that were former steel communities and so forth? Is this just all symbolism, or is there any? What's the real game here?
That's a great question too, and I think it's hard to say. I think it is partially him making good on some campaign promises. Some people are also saying he might try to use it as a negotiating chip for NAFTA. So at this point, I don't think we'll really know, but I do know, with Gary Cohn out, we've got Peter Navarro on the rise, that it's really possible that the administration is moving towards a more skeptical trade policy.
Do you think with the White House turnover and staff turnover that the president and the White House need one of those corporate retreats or team building exercises to get them more closely aligned in a better spot?
I think that probably could help them out a little bit. They seem to be on different pages.
Scott, there's no one left on. Scott, there's no one left on the team.
Exactly. It's so interesting because if China actually is paying people $3 an hour and manufacturing steel, then there's some counter argument to the tariffs. But we all know that when we go against free trade in the long run, it's typically been a disaster globally and economically. So it's a fascinating set of discussions. Ayla and Nader, let me wrap up with you. Any thought either on the tariff issue or the gun control issue? And then Morgan, any final words on anything as well? Nader, let me go to you and then Ayla.
So just very quickly, I think everything that's been said on the tariff and interest rates side, I would agree with. Just conceptually, I know we're not supposed to hear or take sides, but I am very much a capitalist, so not a fan of tariffs. A firm believer that the product should be designed, built, made in the places that are most efficient, that ultimately create the best combination of quality and cost and convenience for customers, because that's what they're going to buy. And if you if you restrict that competition, you're going to make, you're going to become uncompetitive on a global level anyway. So I'm a huge fan of that. And to some of the points there, some of this may just be political posturing. So we'll see how it plays out. From the standpoint of control, I thought there were a couple things that I wanted to bring up. That the U.S. has 5% of the world's population, but about 40% of the world's civilian firearms, which is about 310 million guns. Now that's heavily concentrated in, a smaller group own multiple guns. So it's not that 310 million people own it, but that's number one in the world by far, where 97 out of 100 people in our country own guns. And there is a pretty heavily correlation between that level of gun ownership and, and the homicide rate. The U.S. has one of the highest homicide rates in the world, outside of a few of the kind of countries that tend to be, some in the Middle East and some sort of in where there's a bit more, the drug wars going on. But in terms of industrial, developed countries, we're by far number one in a homicide rate. And so we have, essentially 4.6 out of 100,000 people in terms of homicides. And
so let's stipulate that we've got, and you just stipulated it well, that we've got a huge percentage of guns compared to people, compared to any other country. We've got this long history of a country that grew out of a revolution, the belief that there should be the ability to have guns, in case the government ever gets crazy, one way or the other, that the citizens should be able to have guns to protect themselves from the government. I know that there's no chance of the government getting crazy in our country, because it's always well-tempered in D.C. But that's the counter-argument on this, whether people believe it or not.
Yeah.
Ayla, let me get you to jump in on this if you'd like. Any way to find a middle ground on gun control where there's some ability to hit a middle on this between the political strength of obviously the NRA, the strong beliefs of 30% of the country or 40% of the country that there should be like almost no gun control, and the rest of the country that believes there should be significant gun control, and I know people will argue all over the place, well, there is gun control, there are laws, et cetera, but not to really hit it right, whatever the laws are. We've got 300 million plus guns out there, and it seems pretty easy for people to get them. Ayla, any thoughts on how you make any progress in this?
Scott, this is a great question, but a complicated one. And, I think that there obviously has to be some, a middle ground found on this. Obviously the numbers that were just mentioned, the gun ownership in this country is so high and the homicide rate is so high. But I think that one of the things that sometimes gets left out of the conversation is that, a lot of most of the guns that are used in, the commission of crimes, they're not purchased, from a local gun shop or something like that. They're borrowed, they're stolen, or, bought on the black market. So I think, when we're talking about this, it's not, I think some people get caught up in thinking maybe that the government wants to come into their house and steal their gun or take their gun away. And I think we need to focus more looking at where are these guns coming from, who's using them in the commission of crimes, and trying to find a middle ground there that leaves, both sides walking away feeling like it's going to work for them. So no solution right now, but hopefully people will, begin to come together a bit and try to find a solution to this problem.
Hey Scott, it's Nader. Can I give 2 seconds of just one other thought that I had on that gun control
Please.
issue? I'll do it really quick. So when I was looking at that, so the U.S. obviously one of the highest. Finland has a 69 out of 100 people ownership, so one of the higher countries too. But they have a 0.26 out of 100,000 people homicide rate versus 4.6 in the U.S. So it's 20 times in the U.S. and in Finland. They do have stricter gun control where citizens have to obtain gun license, have to be renewed every 5 years. They have to state the reason for a gun. Self-defense is not actually valid in that case, so it's interesting. Police can deny or revoke permission if an applicant is convicted of a crime, and large capacity magazines not permitted. Weapons have to be stored in locked cabinets and unloaded if taken outside the house. So interesting, not saying that obviously there's controversy there, I clearly understand that, but I thought it was interesting to see a similar gun ownership on a relative basis with 1/20th of the homicide rate.
Well, your numbers are off, so my quick calculations is 1/17th of the homicide rate, not 1/20th. But what's fascinating is some of these other countries do have a long list of details you have to go through, where it might take you 1 to 6 months to get a gun or longer because you have a process you have to go through. And obviously, people have been posting all that kind of stuff recently, and it's interesting to see, is there a way to reach a middle ground, or do you have to get to a spot where you've got, one political party winning a couple elections so they could just push it down the throat of the other political party, or is there some middle ground that can be hit on it so you avoid that kind of outcome, which is always a bad outcome too? Anyways, I want to thank Morgan, Ayla, Emily, Venkat, and Nader. I promised our audience and you we'd keep this to about 30 minutes or about 5 minutes over. I hopefully we had an interesting discussion around Amazon and the world we live in, and then on some of these other issues like gun control and tariffs, and hopefully people enjoyed it. I want to thank everybody for joining, those that listened in. Maggie, I'll follow up with you. But again, thank all of you very, very much for participating, and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, Scott.
I'm going to, bye, guys.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, everyone.